Okay, everybody, thanks for some that small commercial break brought to you by Bush Light, the king of beers. Um, but go ahead, Drew. I know Hubbard. Drew, just kind of remind everybody what Hubbard had asked you, and then go ahead and answer.
Yeah, so that's actually I love the question that you just opened up with. So we're talking about weighing quality wins, quality losses. I know that that was a quality loss was a contentious point last year. We're just going to come right out and say and own it as a committee. We may have again we talked about changing our protocols and processes here. We were looking at okay, take Penn State, great example, right? We had them ranked in our first poll. They sat in there at number 13. Uh, you know, nothing really outstanding about their schedule that says top 12, 13, 14 team. But we looked at the losses. Well, they've only lost to Ohio State and Oregon. And so we did probably fall a little bit into the false narrative of giving too much credence to them having only lost to these teams. Whereas when we get a little farther down into the line here, right, where we start to debate 13, 14, 15, uh, Penguin, we'll go ahead and just use you as an example that you were the most diabolical vote in our first couple rounds. Some guys thought you should be quite high, some guys thought you should be quite low. Some people were citing, the schedule in front of you, low opponent win percentage, but uh, it's an exercise. So that that's not to single out any one team here. Those are just two good examples of demonstrating how maybe we did overvalue a quote unquote, and not even a quality loss, right? Like even worse, you go and look at the way in which Penn State lost, they got smoked twice. Sorry, Nidler, but it is what it is, right? That was probably a mistake, and that was part of the recalibration of where we went with things. And so, same with Iowa State. I thought that they were treated fairly. There was a lot of dialogue there, and I think that we came to a pretty reasonable conclusion on where they belonged, and everybody that was one that helped round us into a little bit more of an even line of thinking rather than kind of being flyers, standard deviation right and left with a different line of thinking entirely. So that's definitely something that we focus on. Those terms, try to use them sparingly and not make them part of the primary thought process, right?
Yeah, I just think it's interesting because I think in that group of teams, it's probably going to be in that 9, 10, 11 range that you were talking about earlier. I look at it, and I told Penguin this morning. I think that none of those teams maybe have a signature win. I think they have I think they have time to do that still, right? So
Yes.
so if it comes down to they don't none of them have a great win, then I think you almost have to look at the loss section a little bit, and just becomes a whole. I know Penguin and I last week we were talking about this. Like there's some teams we look at the losses, and there's some teams we look at the wins, and I think that's a man. That's just a slippery slope
Yeah.
because I think at some point that may have to be the deciding factor.
For sure. And so one thing about that too that's like and this is where I don't know how these conversations go in real life, and this is a tough one, right? So one thing, we try to be just, try to be fair, right? Like you talking about what some teams don't have a signature win yet, but there are teams that had opportunities in front of them. I'll
Right.
take a result that didn't come into play for this particular poll, right? Because it happened this morning or last after we have voted, doesn't matter. Clemson and Louisville went out and played. Clemson won the game. Now, part of the conversation there with Louisville, because they're one of the perfect teams that you're talking about that fits into that window of teams that we're discussing, maybe 10, maybe 11, 12, 13, whatever it may be. But some of those teams get rated a little bit higher or lower depending on what's in front of them too. Because one thing that we don't want to do is stick somebody in, say, the 11 spot and then they don't have any big games left to play. But then our
Yeah.
guy down in 15, who may have one less win but equal loss, whatever, goes out and wins his games. And even though there's a justifiable reason to jump that other person, it's not a great look when that team goes out and handles their business still. And you said they were the 12th best team before, but now you're telling me just because they won now. So
Yeah.
you try to maybe sometimes you slot a team a little bit too high because you slotted somebody else a little bit lower, knowing that hey, if that team goes and wins out, they're jumping no matter what. And if this team even slips up in front of them once, they're gone. Miami was a great example, right? Like they maybe should have been rated one higher, people thought, because they had beat Notre Dame. How does Notre Dame come in front of them? Some of our guys thought maybe even 10 or 11 was probably right for Miami. Beautiful thing is Miami went out and played their games, and they made it easier for us.
It
So
made it easier.
we try to make it so that we can make the next vote make sense and not have to do what the committee did with the Florida State saying, well, Jordan Travis is, we're not falling into that bullshit. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. So last thing about that, Clemson's a great example, right? Because we'll find out where you have them now, but they have one loss at the moment, right? And that was to Texas, if I'm not mistaken, early on. They're going to play LSU in this block. So how far do you think, just from the conversation you've had, how do you consider if they were to lose to LSU this week? It's a loss, it's a second loss, but it's to one of the better teams, one of the top 4 or 5 teams. So how does that play out?
yeah, I think what you get into there is probably the same conversation that you were just talking about with the 8, 9, 10 through 12,
Yeah.
right? Just as much as we don't in seasons past, we've had 7, 8, 9, 10 teams that have gone out and just blown their schedule out of the water and made that a lot easier. Now you've already got a good 6 or 7 teams that have a rightful reason to at least be in the conversation for the back end. But boy,
Mhm.
you really jumble up the front end of that conversation too. You know what
Right.
I mean? You got the
Yeah.
because even Texas and Bama, right? Like we had Texas clear the number one. That vote wasn't long at all. But Bama has a great win on their schedule too. That LSU win. Texas
Yep.
smoked Clemson. But I mean, it's hard. You're not gonna. It definitely matters the manner in which you lose, right? We
For
just talked
sure.
about Penn State
For
losing
sure.
by. If Penn State went out and played 2 3 point games against Oregon and Ohio State, they were probably still very much in the conversation, even without a signature win, recognizing that some other people are going to go out and play big games. But
Yeah.
um, it would be interesting. I think I won't comment on that any more than that, just because I don't know how that would go, and I don't want to create
For
anything.
sure.
So, but I guess I say this: I love it. The more chaos we have, the better. It just creates more talking points for the league, gets more engagement,
Yeah.
and it just creates good storylines. So however the chips fall, I think it's going to be fun. We got a lot of good coaches vying here, and I like seeing some new teams up in there like a NC State. I think that's great. So
Yep. I
So
agree.
obviously, it's no secret to anyone in the league. Penguin and I can't stand the word quality losses because we just don't think that there's no such thing as a quality loss. But Drew, I think you bring up a good word, the wordage of how you lose, because that is a big difference, right?
right,
Penguin, you'd be the first one to say how you lost to Duke. That matters, right? And
yeah,
you've said it.
very much so.
You've been the one, Penguin, that have come out and said, hey, I'm not here in this talk now because of how I lost to Duke. So I do enjoy that. I do want to bring up the chat right now. We have Chip in the chat who says it in the past. We talked about this before the show. Drew, is in the past, it's always worked itself out with our college football playoff committee. Okay, it's just kind of always worked itself out. It you may have that one team on the outside that borderline has an argument, but for the most part, our league has just worked itself out for the 12 teams that belong in. I'm telling you, this year's different. We're approaching the last block, and we have. You talked about it, Drew. Top heavy wise, it's worked out, right? We know those teams are in those top 6 teams. Even if they lose a game, lose a conference championship, they're still in. But man, from the 6, 7, like the 7, 8, 9, 10, that is a jumbled mess right now because there's a lot of good games left in the blocks. We still have games that aren't played, games that will be played. We talk about Maryland and Michigan State. That's a big game. When you're talking about from the playoff picture for teams that are borderline right now that want in, you're talking about a Michigan State team, Drew, where I'm sure that name has had to have just been surfacing somewhere in your meetings. 2 blocks ago, no one was like, they're still barely ranked. Michigan State's still barely ranked. And so you talk about a team over the course of the last couple weeks that went from, no playoff picture, no rankings, top 25, to now we have Maryland and Michigan State, who just recently both surfaced in our rankings. Potentially one of those teams have a shot at the college football playoff. And so it just shows how crazy this season has been when it comes to talking points, to being able to. I can't imagine how tough it is. I know last week we were pretty hard on Monday morning. Me and Freak and Pat were pretty hard on the committee because we didn't agree with some of the things that they did. But at the end of the day, man, what a tough job this season on the committee. By far, I would consider it to be the toughest this late in the season. I know you guys have only met like what, twice? I can't even imagine.
Was met Friday night. Yeah, last night was our second meeting. So yeah,
Yeah,
we had
how
met on Sunday night, the first night, because a lot of it is about when can everybody actually get together.
yep.
So we have the most input and quality meeting, and then we all realized, okay, we need to make every effort we can to go Friday nights so that we can sync up with the new block opening and get all it just because again, we're only supposed to vote on the result up to the end of that block. And so we got into that confusing bit where well they played today or what time did that game close? And so like that was one thing that was helpful and will be easier moving forward. I want to bring up that Duke again. That was a great example. You talk about Duke and Iowa State quality loss. And again, that's why we be careful with that term. I know it comes up, but it's reframing that narrative, right? Instead of talking about a bad loss for Penguin and a quality loss for Duke to say at Clemson, let's say Iowa State played their way out of a higher seed because of the way they lost. Duke, in a sense, we were kind of looking at that, right? And they're falling into that same category that we're talking about, that jumbled back end. But even though they have two losses, NC State and Clemson. So that trio right there, bring NC State into that. Duke lost to Clemson, but they went toe to toe and lost 65-55. So with 10 points, it's pretty close right there. Either way, very high scoring game and they went at it. Then you got another team like NC State who's ranked well, and they went out and they shut Duke down and won 24-21 based off their defense. So that's part of the conversation with the committee, right? You know, you get into game theory and things like that, and what do you value more, defense, offense? And this is where it gets like it's tough. You get into the weeds. You have to get into the weeds. So we're looking at different things. You know, Duke, something that helps Duke number one offense in the league, highest total offense, yards per game, points per game. Okay. We all know that the Texases, the Alabamas, the LSUs, you've got to be able to score if you want to win a title here. So scoring matters. Flip side is somebody that's great at defense can go out and have themselves a day and still win too. NC State's a great example. So then you get to that second level. A committee had Tennessee ranked in our first vote, and that was an interesting one because they got built off of their defense too. And so, like uh, Alabama and Tennessee, I'm going to use as my two examples for the next stat level you have to get to. The team stat page is super helpful in my opinion. If I have a nice spreadsheet that I keep all the time, Alabama, according to the metrics from the team sheets on the NDL site, has the 47th power rated offense. I don't think anybody in this league thinks that Smitty in Alabama has the 47th best offense, right? So then you get into the weeds there and you start to see, okay, well, Smitty is the number two run rate in the NDL. He'll ground and pound you. So you can kind of see where those stats skew more towards the higher powered offense and can make a team like Alabama look like they might not be the threat that they are on the offensive side of the ball. Same
So
with Tennessee. You know,
Drew, can
Tennessee.
you
Yeah, go ahead.
explain to the viewers, like I know on that stat sheet it talks about quad 1, quad 2,
Yep.
quad 3, quad 4. I know someone brought up in the live chat a couple weeks ago. They had no idea what
Yep.
any of that meant. Can you just touch base on what that means? If you know. If you don't,
Yeah. So that I mean, there's a lot of consternation about that one. We did not discount the quad. Like so on my spreadsheet, I keep a track of quad 1 and 2 wins and losses, and Massey top 25 wins and losses. So we're definitely counting that, but uh, there is also the issue that we don't fully understand the formulas there, right? And so we try to include, but man, we were looking at some of them last night, and I'm not going to call any teams out off the top of my head because I don't. But there were some funky teams sitting in quad 1 and 2 that didn't make sense. Um, so the quadrants definitely matter. But same with the Massey, right? Like the Massey, the note I had written down about the Massey is when you get to that final ranking, again, because of the way it all works out, you're going to see the Massey relatively correlate with the teams that we have in there. But even right now, I mean, you have teams. down in the 20s and 30s in the Massey rating that are sitting inside of our top 12. So it's hard to look at all that just those things, because you can't necessarily wrap your head around that. But I can more wrap my head around the fact that when I look at the stats in a Utah, some people, when this comes out, you'll see wherever they land. Some people had them one higher, some had them one lower, some thought they were right on. And even something like that can just come down to, hey, look, Utah is a top 10 team in turnovers forced, interceptions. Again, we know guys get pass happy at times if you can pick the ball off. So there's a lot of those just little game theory things that where it does come into knowing who the coach is. Again, let's be clear, that's not saying that we weight who the coach is as part of the current record, etc. That's not for these meetings. That comes down to like your final meeting where you start to, but understanding what those stats mean and how that can play into results that are already posted versus how looking forward these matchups may look, understanding what that means in terms of correlating that to your actual top 12 and getting that right. So um,
I think, I think
you might hear a justification for one team that doesn't hold water with another. Yeah, there's gonna be misses, but we try to look all the way through each and every available number to us to make sure that it makes sense. Try to put
couple
it
of
to you
us were
that way.
talking a couple weeks ago about how obviously we mimic real life. The league mimics as much as we can real life because we enjoy that. But also sometimes what gets lost in that is that it is a video game. That
Yep.
coach A that coaches at a tier 1 team and coach B who coaches at a tier 2 team, the coach matters more than the team in the video game. In real life, that's not the case. Right? In real life, I mean coaches matter, but in our video game, sometimes we put a lot of weight on the teams playing teams instead of the coach playing coaches. And that's very relevant when we have new coaches that join the league and we don't know who they are, how they are, and they end up being very good. And so sometimes when I look at those quads wins and stuff, to me, when I'm looking at, a team that may be rated 85 and then a team that's rated 75, if the coaches are really good and the other coaches really, like we've seen coaches that have taken top tier teams and not won a single game, but somehow we're putting a lot of weight on that lower rated team beating them in the video game. It's not like Appalachian State going into Michigan and beating them in real life, right? Like you just don't see that in the video game. It's a really good coach that's going to win a lot of games and a really bad coach that's going to lose a lot of games at those tier teams. And so I think sometimes that gets lost. Obviously, the committee, I'm sure, looks at that. And that's what I think you're saying is that we don't entirely use just what team is being used and played. We're taking account everything. And so I'm super excited. I'm super excited to get into the reveal here. Drew, the way we'll do the reveal is I'm going to reveal the top 6 teams first, and then we'll go the other way back.
Sounds
Because
good.
we kind of agree that the top 6, I mean, everybody probably knows a majority of those. It's not going to be a giant shocker, but there may be some, and we'll skip I mean, almost everybody knows who that last one in is, just because they're forced to be in there. And so we'll just kind of go from there on the screen here. I know you guys will be able to see the reveal, and we'll just kind of go through that together here, if that works for everybody. So, and go ahead and interject in here, Penguin and Hubbard, if you'd like, just about the team and if you think this is where they're supposed to be slotted. Number 1 team here is the Texas Longhorns. I would think that Penguin and Hubbard would both agree. I think they both had them at number 1 in theirs last week, if I'm not mistaken.
There's no question there. I mean, especially with LSU going down, you could maybe argue for Alabama, but Texas you can't argue against them really effectively.
Number 2 is the Alabama Crimson Tide. I know they were talked about. Obviously, Drew kind of hit on both of them, have, big arguments for number 1, but just the way Texas has handled its business, it's really tough to give up that spot at this time. Your number 3 team, Ohio State Buckeyes. Coach D. Kennedy up there putting together a great season, obviously something different for Ohio State since the game's released. And so no big shocker there. Your number 4 team is your Oregon team. So we're seeing 2 SEC teams, and then obviously we got two Big Ten teams. What do you guys think about Oregon getting the 5 spot?
I think they're interchangeable with Ohio State. I think it's semantics at this point. If you think Oregon's defense is more impressive, or if Ohio State just overall dominance being more impressive is really a question.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, and ultimately, 3 or 4 is not going to make a huge difference, even if it all plays out with chalk. Playing Texas or Alabama in the semifinals is not one significantly easier at all.
Yep. And here's the thing, though, is that to think about, Hubbard, is that both of these teams, somebody potentially is going to get knocked out of the top 4 twice, right? Because
Right.
Texas and Alabama are locked to play in the SEC championship. Potentially, Ohio State, Oregon, you would see them both playing in the championship. And so when they lose their championship game, they have the potential to be knocked out of the top 4, right? You could see another team like Utah. You could see Utah have an argument to be number 3 or 4.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can see body work, though, right? It's I don't know. That'd be tough to punish them, and that's the real life argument too, right? How do you punish somebody for playing that extra 13th game?
But
that
are you really punishing them, Hubbard? If Utah goes undefeated and wins their conference championship, don't you have to reward them for winning that extra game?
Well, right. I mean, that's the argument, right? Like, if all things equal and they only play 12. I mean, if Utah's in the championship game, that's different, right? But I don't know. I would still have to say, like, is lose. That's kind of what I asked Drew earlier. If Alabama loses to Texas, does it really mean they're the 5th or 6th best team? No, I still think we would say they're probably still the 2nd best team. So where does that come into play with? Yeah, they had the loss versus they didn't. I don't know. That's gonna be interesting to see. And I think it goes back to how does it play out? Does Jiggy or Smitty beat each other by 3 touchdowns, or is it a 2-point game? That would matter. Same thing with Oregon and Ohio State as well. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what would happen at that point.
Well, so then obviously right now the committee, as you see up on the screen here, committee puts LSU at number 5. Okay. So scenario is you're going to have LSU wins out, has 1 loss, Alabama, Texas play in that championship game. They have 1 loss. Obviously, you have that's going to bring up some question is when you have 2 1-loss teams, if they haven't played each other, who you put ahead of them?
Well, it's kind of easy though, Penguin, right? Because if Texas beats Alabama and Alabama and LSU are sitting there with 1 loss, well, that's an easy one. We saw Alabama beat LSU, right? If Alabama beats Texas, now that's it goes back to this Texas, because now you're talking about a situation where LSU didn't play that 13th game, right? And so is Texas losing to the number 2 team in the rankings, knock them below LSU, and who Alabama beat as well.
Do you think it'll matter how they lose, right? So if Alabama loses, you're going to have Alabama, LSU sitting there that they didn't play each other in the regular season. Is it going to matter how they lose? Because Texas played them both. So what if Texas wallops Schmitty?
Well, you're backwards.
You're backwards there, Tim.
Oh, okay.
It would be okay. So here's the only argument. The only argument I would make in that situation is, okay, I don't even remember what the score was. How bad did Alabama beat LSU? It was
Alabama didn't
10.
play LSU. They played them in the
Alabama
Beefy Cup.
Alabama beat that was a regular season game. Alabama beat LSU.
So I'm looking at Alabama schedule right now, and unless the website's wrong, Alabama played Temple, Kent State, BYU, Boston College, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Tennessee, South Carolina, LSU. I'm wrong.
Okay. No, I was thinking, okay, Tim, we need to get Tim some help.
I got
Do you smell toast?
No,
so I'm definitely backwards.
It would be interesting. So Alabama beats LSU by 10. If Alabama beats Texas by 20, right? Okay, then maybe you have that argument of which one should be higher in that situation. But I still think it comes down to, is it just that one game that matters, or is it the body of work? And that's why that conversation would have to be one that would take a lot of time, I'm sure. Because I'll be honest, 4 and 5, we look at it like it doesn't really hurt you. I mean, yes, you got to play an extra game to win it. But if you're the 5 seed, you're going to get that group of 5 team, right? And you get to play it at home. So, I mean, not that it's a death sentence to be 5 over 4, but man, it's
well, and you talk about, I don't know, we obviously heard a committee member talk about strength of schedule being a big thing they look at, right? So the season plays out, you have Texas and LSU sitting there with one loss, scenario wise. Both lose fairly similar to Alabama, we'll say. Texas plays the number 8 strongest schedule in the nation. LSU plays the 3rd. Okay. And I bet their wins and losses against ranked opponents and stuff are all going to be pretty similar. And so it'll be really interesting. They obviously both challenged each other outside of the conference, where they went out and played Clemson and Illinois and stuff like that. So obviously, Jiggy just takes care of business and wins. It's a really easy argument because Alabama beat LSU, and so I mean, both sitting there with one loss, it isn't going to matter. Another question to bring up, Hubbard, okay, is we know EA has messed up home field advantage, right?
Yeah.
We have no idea what the committee. I would only assume that the admins and the committee in general are going to come up with a plan on how the playoffs have to be played out. Let's just say this is one of those asterisk seasons where the top seed gets to play home field until you get maybe to the. I mean, I don't know how they do it. Maybe you get to the Final Four and then it's a coin flip. Like I don't know, but also that could be really big. We were just talking about how the 1 through 6 seed, it really doesn't matter. Being the number 1 seed in here could be a giant benefit to somebody.
Yeah, no, it could if that was the case for sure. Here's the other thing, right? We talk about matchups between Texas and LSU that are the same. You got to remember also that LSU, if they were to win this week and beat Clemson, now LSU and Texas both beat Clemson. You could compare those wins versus also what they did against Alabama also. So there's going to be some comparison points between the two to get there. Yeah, the home field thing is interesting. That's something I haven't really thought about a whole lot. I know there's a lot of talk about that this week. If you can't play neutral site games, how do you do that? And that would come into play big time about who those top seeds are.
Yeah, and so you
Tim,
guys
I
see.
can't see your screen. Do me a favor, hey bud.
Yep.
I don't see the presentation. Let me know who you have at 5, 6, and 7 here.
Yep.
Please.
LSU sitting at 5. We have Utah at 6. Okay, Utah at 6. I don't think anyone would argue with that, right? Power 4 conference, undefeated right now. We talked about it a little bit, even with Pat in here. Is that Penguins in here and stuff? Is that conference is a little down this year compared to how we thought it was kind of going to play out. You had teams like Colorado and stuff that have kind of underperformed.
Hey, so listen, I'm not sure what happened here. We'll have to circle back to the full committee, but we're out of order here. We came out of the meeting last night with Utah at 5, Clemson at 6, and LSU at 7.
Hey, give me a second here. I may have
problem.
that too. So when we restarted the OBS stream, let me get in here because I don't want to go any further.
'Cause those numbers sound more like last week. I think LSU was 5, Clemson was
That
6,
is.
Utah.
which would make
So,
sense.
Yeah, Tim, that's
So
right. It's Utah,
okay.
Clemson, LSU.
So here I'm just going to get
Thank you.
off of this. Then we'll go back to this. So then what we'll do is for the reveal, I'm just going to say them out loud because I do have them here, and so I'll just say them out loud. And so so we do have Oregon 4. Thank you, Drew, because it would have been a real mess if we'd have kept going because it's definitely different than last season or last week. We do have Utah is sitting at 5. Okay. And then Clemson at number 6. So Clemson, the ACC, making it into the top 6 there. Penguin, what are your thoughts on Clemson in the top 6?
I mean, they did lose pretty decisively when they did, but it was to Texas. So, I mean, personally, they might be a touch bit too high for my taste, but I mean, they're right about where they belong for sure.
What about you, Hubbard? Do you think that
we talk about it? Well, we talk about it playing itself out. We're going to get that this week with Clemson LSU playing, right? So one of them's going to be there.
Yeah.
The question is, and I was going to bring up Utah when we had them at 6, but even at 5, I think is interesting because think about this: other than Oklahoma State, who have we been talking about the last couple of weeks that's been really hot in the Big 12? Well, it's Texas Tech now. All of a sudden, that is all of a sudden gotten hot, and they're sitting there at 9-2, I think, at this point. And Utah back in the beginning, they dominated Texas Tech, right? I think it's a 19-point win, something like that, 16 or 19, one of those two things. And so this Utah team sitting there at 10-0, and it's like, okay, they dominated Tech, and if they can go through this conference undefeated, they do have a claim to be in that top 4 if they can get there based on what's going to happen in front of them. So that's a team that I know people are going to be like, man, Utah number 5, and I'm thinking, yeah, they have a right to argue for that, if not even higher potentially.
Yeah, I think they'll have a very valid argument, Utah, if they run the table. When we have a Big 12 and an SEC team lose in that championship game, obviously Utah is going to have a very big argument to be number 3 if they win out, right? They're going to have a giant argument to be number 3, where I really think there's no way that you're not going to reward them for winning their conference championship. And it's just one of those things where their conference isn't as strong as we thought it was going to be at the beginning of the season. And so I think that's why they take a lot of flack, though. We'll go in. We're going to drop all the way down to the 12 team. This will be kind of what I'm going to do. I'm trying to see how I'm going to do this so that I'm actually going to go down to the 11th team. Okay. I'm going to do the 11th team and we're going to skip the 12th team. Okay. And the reason being is you won't know who the 12th team is. You're going to know who the 12th team is, but you're not going to know who's out. Because I don't have the reveal thing. Does that make sense? Because everybody knows that Missouri State gets slotted in at the 12th spot, right? And the reason being is they're a mid-major. They get an automatic qualifying bid any Power 5 team. And what the committee's doing is they're basically stating that this team right now is the best team right now in a Power 5. And so we know Missouri State's slotted in at the 12th spot, even though last week I did misspoke. They were not rated number 12 in the committee's ratings. Last week, Missouri State was not ranked in the top 16, but they were the highest rated Power 5 team for the committee itself. And I misspoke about that. I just gave the top 12 and we just slotted them in. And so I'll tell you, this week, Missouri State is ranked, according to the committee members, 16. They're ranked 16 out of the top teams, but they're going to get slotted into number 12. Okay. So I'm going to skip 11 too, because I think if I tell everyone 11, they're going to know who 12 was, the first out. Okay. So number 10 in the committee member rankings is NC State. ACC team, obviously super heavy here at the bottom. They were last week as well. We have NC State at number 10. What are your thoughts on that, Penguin?
I'll not speak ill against Tolmy. I think he's had a fantastic season. He's played good defense, but it's definitely higher than I would put him presently.
What about you, Hubbard? Where are you putting NC State?
I actually had them a little bit higher. I think I had them at 9. They're just part of that group, right? And it's how do you value what happened in that triangle of NC State, Duke, Iowa State, all those things that happened and how they played each other. How do you value that, right? I think you have to have NC State ahead of Duke because they had the win, and I also believe you have to have Duke ahead of Iowa State because of the win, right? You also have to have
now. Does there a point where it enters in that they don't? We're talking about teams that don't have the same number of losses. When does that matter?
I think if it becomes I don't. What's the gap right now? NC State has 2, right, or 1.
Mm-hmm.
2.
We're talking 2 versus 1.
2.
Yeah. I don't think 2 versus 1's enough to make a difference. I think if it goes to 3, yes. Now, who is that second loss to? That would be the argument, right? Like, is that second loss so bad? All right. Here's an example, Penguin. If UConn were to beat NC State, right? Then at that point, I would not have to be sold on Duke has to be behind NC State because you're looking at a different loss that's not as good. And the NC State Duke game was close. It was a 3-point game, right? And I didn't even look to see where it was played at. Was it at Duke? Was it NC State or whatever? Which would make a huge difference, right? I don't know. For you, unfortunately, the problem becomes that if you'd have lost by 3 to Duke, then I could have that argument. With Duke and Iowa State, the conversation has to be multiple loss difference, right? I mean, there's got to be something, or we have to see Duke just fall apart over the last couple of games, right? I mean, we would just have to be able to look at it and say, man, he is just not playing good. It's a hard conversation, and I think it's just because, like I said, until there is that separation between those teams, it's just tough. I mean, I think Tennessee's in that argument, right? I think that you could put.
I mean, the conversation's kind of like the billboard you see put up by PETA